Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. I guess I'm going to talk about Canada first, or something from Canada, which gives you a pretty good idea of the state of this country. There was a woman called Dr. Theresa Tam. She's originally from China. She is now Canada's chief medical officer, and she is telling us now that COVID-19 is pretty much burnt out. But just panic. Don't stop the panic. We need the panic. From Reuters, stop kissing, wear a mask while having sex to prevent coronavirus, Tam says. Adding that going solo remains the lowest risk sexual option in a pandemic. But wait a minute, won't you go blind? Dr. Theresa Tam said in a statement, there is little chance of catching COVID-19 from semen or vaginal fluid, but sexual activity with new partners does increase the risk of contracting the virus, particularly if there is close contact like kissing. Quote, like other activities during the COVID-19 that involve physical closeness, there are some things you could do to minimize the risk of getting infected and spreading the virus, unquote. Stop kissing, avoid face-to-face closeness, wear a mask that covers your mouth and nose, and monitor yourself and your partner for symptoms ahead of any sexual activity. Tam said the lowest risk sexual activity during COVID-19 involves yourself alone. If you look at pictures of Theresa Tam, I don't recommend that because that might put any of you off coitus forever. But I just imagine what's going through her mind. What is this human thing they call sex? Yes. Oh, and previously, the government of British Columbia, I'm not making this up, had said, this is from back in July, try glory holes for safer sex during the coronavirus. Yeah, that's right. The BC Centre for Disease Control added new recommendations for socially distanced sex to its COVID-19 website this week. One of those tips was to try using a glory hole, a hole cut into a wall that's only large enough for a penis to slip through. They are an excellent way to limit physical contact during intercourse, the BC CDC says. The recommendation is just a tip, haha, and not a firm, haha, rule, according to the website. Are you having a laugh? Yeah. Well, we know who is fond of glory holes. I won't go into the gory details. But yeah, how about we just stop procreation altogether? I mean, we're all going to die, right? Well, actually, we're not, but from the New York Times, up to 90% of people who test positive for the coronavirus are highly unlikely to spread it to others, according to data from 2 states. What should we do about that? Oh my God. 1, cheer. 2, end the lockdowns. 3, wear sackcloth and ashes for the rest of your lives to apologize for the lockdowns. That's what I would recommend. You know, the flu season is coming, and I saw a story today that some to the effect that COVID-19 numbers have to be brought down radically because flu season is coming. And you know what that means? It means the push is going to be on for us to wear masks forever and ever. Amen. Because you can never be too safe, and you can never be too humiliated, I guess it would be. The second wave, ooh, that second wave. Yeah, the media and the health authorities, go second wave. Come on, second wave, don't let us down. This is from Will Jones at Lockdown Skeptics. No sign of second wave. Experts rubbish Matt Hancock's alarmist claims. This is from The Mail. Health Secretary Matt Hancock warned that the UK must do everything in our power to stop a second surge of people going into hospital with the coronavirus, which he said was starting to happen in Europe. But experts told Mail Online Hancock's comments were alarmist and that there is currently no sign of a second wave coming over the horizon. Oh dear. The data shows hospital cases are also not rising by much in Europe, contrary to the health secretary's claim. As of yesterday, there were only 764 people in hospital with COVID-19 in the UK, just 60 of whom are in intensive care. This is a sharp drop from a peak of 19,872 hospitalized patients on April the 12th. It doesn't seem like an awful lot of cases, does it? It doesn't seem like there's all that many people in hospital, does it? And how many people live in the United Kingdom? 68 million people live in the United Kingdom. But of course, the United Kingdom must be turned into a dictatorship because there's 764 people in hospital suffering from one particular disease. The falling number of hospital cases comes despite infections having been on the rise since lockdown restrictions were lifted at the start of July. What might that tell us? That COVID-19 has killed almost all of the people that it's going to kill, and for the people that it hasn't killed, it's not really all that dangerous. Scientists say that it is younger people driving up infections, and they are less likely to get seriously ill and end up in hospital. For that reason, hospital cases and deaths will not necessarily follow higher cases, and there may not be a deadly wave like the first. Professor Carl Hennigan, a medicine expert at the University of Oxford, said, quote, "There is currently no second wave. What we are seeing is a sharp rise in the number of healthy people who are carrying the virus but exhibiting no symptoms. Almost all of them are young. They're being spotted because finally a comprehensive system and national test and trace is in place," unquote. Hancock said in the Commons yesterday that he feared this rise in infections in healthy people would creep into vulnerable groups if allowed to continue, saying it was a pattern seen in the US where cases are out of control. Again, out of control. More news from the United Kingdom. The government has done another U-turn, deciding not to lift restrictions in Bolton and Trafford. The areas are to be kept in lockdown at the request of local bedwetting councillors, while restrictions are eased in the rest of the region. Amazing to think that locking down healthy populations was unheard of before March. Now it seems to be the first tool in the box. None of the areas is seeing a sustained rise in cases above around 50 per 100,000, however. Maybe it's time to stop with these sledgehammer lockdowns. A reader has pointed out a worrying story in a local newspaper about a Twinham school in Christchurch, which is enforcing masks at all times, including in classrooms. Government guidance on this is clear. Face coverings can have a negative impact on learning and teaching, so their use in the classroom should be avoided. Meanwhile, the parent of a child at Bedales, a boarding school in Hampshire that charges fees of £39,000 a year, has been in touch with some shocking news. Bedales School has had a single kid with sore throat on first day back, all immediately sent home for another fortnight right after the £13,000 term fees checks cleared. After someone claimed this wasn't true in the comments, we double-checked it. Turns out a group of 26 formers at Bedales were sent home yesterday after one became ill. All 20 had been at the same party the night before. And a reader from Merseyside has been in touch with a disturbing story about the experience of his sons as they returned to school today. My boys started at school today. They're usually quite robust and no nonsense, but they came home in tears. They have to face the front all day. If they turn their heads, it is a mandatory week exclusion. They must use the one-way system, and if they are caught not doing so, they are excluded. 3 people excluded today because they forgot and turned the wrong way. They only get half an hour for lunch, but they have to queue up in silence for 20 minutes, and when they get in, they are moved off under the threat of exclusion, and they have to be back in their rooms by the stroke of 30 minutes, or guess what happens? Exclusion. So no lunch. It's the only break they get. Guess what happens if they talk in class? Guess what happens if the slightest bit of uniform is wrong? even though we can only order from one supplier and they are running 4 weeks behind. The school buses haven't turned up and the public buses aren't letting the kids on because they have provided a free bus for the school kids, one single decker for the whole school. They need to be in for 8:30 a.m. If they are not on time, then they will be excluded. If they are seen around the school outside at any time before 8:30 a.m., then they will be excluded. How is this supposed to work, especially when they can't get to school because there are no buses? The head has told me they should walk. A 90-minute walk at 7 a.m. in winter in the dark along a dual carriageway, and the same home. Oldest child, 13, has to go to school in PE shorts that haven't arrived and have 3 hours PE at the end of the day and then walk home in it. All the teachers are completely encased in acrylic boxes at the front of the classroom and aren't allowed to leave them while pupils are in the classroom. Well, I guess it's good to get children used to the idea of dictatorship from a very early age, and also to get them used to the idea that schools do not exist for children, they exist for teachers, and that teachers come first. They always come first. And, what we're seeing in North America with this rush, as they say, to get teachers back to work, it's just a impermissible violation of their free time. I mean, in an ideal world, teachers would be paid very generous salaries for not doing anything, really. University students in America are finding they've signed up not, as they thought, to a world-class educational experience with a bit of Animal House thrown in, but an overpriced stint in the clink. Tyler Durden at Zero Hedge has more. These restrictions are absurd from the perspective of protecting young people's health, given that coronavirus is not particularly dangerous. This is especially the case for the teen and 20-something students. For these relatively young college students, coronavirus generally poses very little risk of death. Further, most such young adults experience zero symptoms to minor sickness from coronavirus infection. I've written about the draconian restrictions imposed at college campuses in the name of countering coronavirus, with some focus on Duke University, Syracuse, and the University of Texas and Texas A&M. These are not handpicked examples of campuses whose college administrators have imposed uniquely harsh rules in the name of countering coronavirus. The problem is present at many college campuses across America. The piece relays testimonials collected by Jordan Schachtel of students living in prison-like conditions across America. Here's a selection. No gatherings above 15 people. Everyone's mental health is crumbling. Nobody is even sick, and those who quarantine follow the rules. School requires asymptomatic testing, and there's no end in sight. My guy and girlfriends are all miserable. So many have been like this in prison, we can't do anything. All bars closed in Louisiana. We gather at local parks, and the cops come to shut it down. No fun ever allowed, and no end in sight. Students must wear masks outside dorm rooms, cannot visit another dorm, etc., threatened with draconian honor code violations if they violate the rules, and orientation was declared all virtual at the last minute. Yet today, the athletes, with permission of and active participation by the university, were permitted to organize a Black Lives Matter march through campus. No roommates, all online classes, no in-person activities, dining halls closed, libraries closed except under very strict guidance, no visiting another dorm room, 6 feet distance at all time, masks mandatory, cannot leave the Nashville area, circles drawn on quad area, threats of suspension or expulsion for first offense, security guards posted throughout campus to enforce rules, kids encouraged to report non-compliance, etc. After having been on campus for a week, my daughter has not met nor spoken to a single person. She is in her dorm room in front of her computer at almost all times, and the only time she really leaves are when she picks up her to-go meals. This is a very depressing situation. Well, you see, the authorities have decided that since life is going to be miserable, solitary, poor, and nasty, and short, that's the point of university now. Let's get everyone used to the new normal, as they call it. Oh, and the People's Republic of Victoria in Australia. A video is circulating of the arrest of a pregnant mother, Zoe Lee, in her pajamas for incitement under Kim Jong-dan's corona laws. Her crime, posting this on Facebook. Freedom Day, Ballarat. Let's see. This is a peaceful protest. All social distancing measures are to be followed so we don't get arrested, please. Please wear a mask unless you have a medical reason not to. September 5th is Freedom Day. As some of you may have seen, the government has gone to extreme measures. Yes. And no protest allowed. Forget what it says in whatever your constitution says, because it's a dictatorship now. And Carl Schmitt, I suppose, should be alive at this time, because he would be absolutely delighted that we have a permanent state of emergency which justifies any government intrusion into our lives. And the new guidance from Governor Newsom of California for lifting COVID-19 restrictions. Yes, Tom Woods comments, this means no return to normal ever. Given the problems of false positives alone, how can these numbers ever be reached? A member of the Tom Woods Show elite pointed out some pertinent facts here. Since 42 of 58 California counties have fewer than 500,000 people, a mere 5 cases per day will keep restrictions in place. Some 23 counties will be forced to keep some restrictions in place with just 1 per day. These guidelines are being released at the very moment that hospitalizations are plummeting, but hospital capacity no longer guides state policy, even though that was the original pretext behind the initial flattening the curve propaganda. As far as I can see it, we're all being punished because the virus won't give up. The virus apparently is sentient. It has agency, and all our attacks, all our threats on it have not persuaded the virus to stop virusing. And I don't know, it's a form of collective punishment. You people have not done enough to put the virus in its place, so you're all going to have to suffer forever. It's your fault. You brought it on yourselves. Don't complain to us. In fact, don't complain about anything, because it's probably against the law. Let's see, what does Alex Berenson have to say? Oh, yes. Alyssa Milano has an update on Facebook. So, how are you? This is a wellness check and a health update. I'm okay. I'm starting to physically feel better. I'm still taking an aspirin every 3 days to thin my blood. Fish oil, vitamin D, C, zinc, and a B complex. I still have occasional heart palpitations. I still forget my words, absolute worst part, but it's not nearly as bad as it was a few weeks ago, etc., etc., etc. I vacillate between being so grateful and so terrified. Grateful that it was me who got sick, and terrified that friends or family will be sick. And I can't help but wonder, how are you? Please be safe. Please let me know that you're okay. A celebrity has spoken. People. Berenson comments, my health check, I am happy yet sad. Happy to be alive yet sad. Alyssa Milano is taking fish oil. So messy. And let's not even talk about the gas. Also sad that she had a CT scan and exposed her lungs to radiation for no reason. Iatrogenic is a word she might want to try to remember. Yes, Hillary Clinton tweeted, it's been confirmed that Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny was poisoned with the same nerve agent used on other Putin critics. Meanwhile, Trump does nothing. We deserve leaders who are strong enough to stand up to Putin and defend democracy. Berenson says, fact check, true. Every minute that the president doesn't speak out about this emboldens Putin further. And bulletin from Dr. Anthony Fauci. This PCR testing stuff is confusing. I'm going to look into it. Meanwhile, please continue to panic until an ineffective vaccine is available. Bulletin from Dr. Anthony Fauci. Oh, yes, here we go. And Fauci is the one who said that corona positive tests must need to drop from 40K to 10K. Why? Even at 40,000 hospitals are fine before we can have a safe flu season, whatever that is. But corona positives are overstated up to 90%, so we're below 10,000 already. Yay, we did it. Oh, yes, and we're also being told that the coronavirus is so insidious that it's affecting all parts of your body. And I guess we have, chronic fatigue syndrome, that COVID-19 is the new chronic fatigue syndrome. Berenson says, yet more proof that long COVID is a fantasy. Fewer than 1 in 25 patients hospitalized for COVID returned to hospital emergency rooms within 2 weeks after discharge, and only half of those needed to be remitted, per a study of almost 3,000 patients. Yes, people who were quite sick. They were hospitalized for nearly a week on average, but once they got better, they got better. Yet people who don't even have a positive COVID test complain about vague symptoms for months. This diagnosis is Munchausen's syndrome by CNN. And I suppose amongst a certain class of people, it's shameful not to have had COVID. Oh, you had COVID. Oh, you tested positive? Oh, no, I didn't have a test. You didn't have a test. Oh, I see. So these pains, aches and pains you're suffering through your body are definitely from COVID-19 and not from the roughly hundreds of other possible causes. I'm sure Alyssa Milano is the envy of all her friends. Let's have a look at the chat. Chad Chadson, hello to our valiant moderator. Dan Allison says, yeah, we wouldn't want actual love to be part of sex, would we? No, it's just a biological function, you know. Chogokin666 says, Vice interviewed the Portland shooter. True, and he confessed on video, says Alex DeLarge. Can you believe this? Vice found him, but the cops can't. Well, I can believe that. Can you talk about the recent info put out by the CDC? I believe that I already have. This is from Metatron. I believe you're referring to, what, 94 and 6? I've talked about that a couple of days. 6% of the people, only 6% of the people who have died from coronavirus or whose deaths are attributed to coronavirus, would be more accurate, did not suffer from significant comorbidities. Frothing Fanboy says, join the genitals. Great. Just don't kiss while you are doing it. Shake my head. YT says, I want off this planet. Jogakin666, a political death squad member and Portland Police Department does nothing. Katrina and the second waves. Good one, Chogokin. David Wright, second wave sounds like more V2 rockets coming. Metatron, will a mask keep me from dying from a BLM nutcase? That's the real question. Mary Crow says, a country that suggests glory holes over kissing can't be considered serious, can it? Oh, well, we're ever so serious here in Canada, not like in the United States, where wicked Donald Trump has refused to order the virus to stop. He's always issuing executive orders. Why hasn't he issued one commanding coronavirus to stop, you know, and threatening severe penalties if it does not? Minerva Shrine says, in Wales, you have to mask up on buses and trains. It's really degrading, makes me furious, to be honest. You have to mask up here on the Lower Mainland, on buses, on the SkyTrain, on the C-Bus, and on BC ferries, even though it has been determined that the risk of transmission on train trips is about 1 in 11,000, and train trips are typically longer than, well, the longest SkyTrain ride is about 40 minutes. BC Ferries ride is typically around 1.5 to 2 hours. My favorite workplace deli shut its doors for good this week, says Glib Medley. I'm sorry to hear that. David Wright says, 2 of my diners also bit the dust. Cuomo doing his thug talk makes it all worthwhile, says Glib Medley. Yeah. Andrew Cuomo said that Trump better have an army if he intends to visit New York. I tweeted Jack at Twitter that, you know, I'm really not a snitch, but doesn't this fall into the category of death threat? Metatron, Alyssa had 2 abortions to star in Double Dragon Milano. Everything that happens to these people is has to be told to the world. And we're all supposed to go, oh, aren't you a good person? Or, oh, aren't you a caring person? Or, oh, hasn't your life been sad? William Hicks says, oh, geez, Alyssa Milano is such an incredible wimp. I had COVID-19 in late March, lasted 3 weeks. I had multiple flus, walking pneumonia, and severe bronchitis multiple times. All were much worse. So you may have heard about these riots in the United States, right? But what riots? There are no riots. The internet is full of pictures of people of undestroyed, ungraffitied buildings saying, see, this rioting, it's false. It's anti-vaxxers putting this out. Extreme right-wingers. I tweeted, this reminds me of the old joke about the Irishman accused of murder, whose lawyer decided to defend him by calling to the stand 12 people that he had not murdered. That, during the London Blitz, during World War II, you could have taken plenty of pictures of London where there was no bomb damage. Would that have proved that there was no bombing in London, or this is not significant? Paul Krugman, who is a certificated idiot, tweeted, I went for a bladed New York City run this morning, and I'm sorry to report that I saw very few black-clad anarchists. Also, the city is not yet in flames. The political question of the day is whether Trump could win politically by hammering on a non-existent crisis of order in America's cities. You would think not, but I'm not 100% confident. As Pew had documented, we went through a quarter century of rapidly falling crime, and all the way through, people declared that crime was rising. Yeah, compared to what? Compared to what? One people is that people live in bubbles. After 2016, there was endless reporting on how urban types don't understand the lives of guys in diners. But there's equal, if not greater, absence of comprehension going the other way. You see these plebs, they're getting ideas above their station. They want a good hiding. What, Paul Krugman? He continues, I haven't seen systematic polling about how rural and even suburban Americans view life in big metropolitan areas, but my guess is that you'd find some remarkable misconceptions. My favorite letter of all time was from a supporter of Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who insisted that us urban Northeasterners just didn't get what life was like for people like him. How would you feel if New York was full of immigrants? As I mentioned in yesterday's newsletter, even some well-educated people I know believe that the brief episode of looting in the early stages of the New York City BLM protests left much of Manhattan a wreck. How many people think Portland 2020 is Newark 1967? Anyway, important to realize that claims of urban anarchy are almost entirely fantasy. Oh, because Paul Krugman's neighborhood has not been sacked, that means that riots. What riots? There has been a complete breakdown of order in the city of Portland. To give one example, what are we up to, 100 days or something? With a mob attempting to burn down the federal building and roast policemen inside, and the police doing precious little about it. Much of downtown Kenosha, Wisconsin, was reduced was burned to the ground. Similar riots in Minneapolis. There have been riots and looting practically everywhere in America. It was not that long ago that Fifth Avenue, New York, it was block after block after block after block of boarded up storefronts. Perhaps Paul Krugman does not shop on Fifth Avenue. And of course, murders in New York and shootings have absolutely exploded. But Paul Krugman has not been shot. So it's not a problem. There was a reply to Krugman from someone called Centrist Stacy. This is actually one of the most privileged things I've ever read. I live in gentrified Brooklyn myself, and my neighborhood is fine. Guess what? I'm worried about the rising shootings in other neighborhoods, even though I can't actually see them. What a concept. One of these people mocking the riots is this silly woman who is called Molly Jong Fast. And she is the daughter of the smut novelist Erica Jong. She's a good friend of Bill Kristol and has appeared on whatever his Never Trump site is many times. She is very upset that, look at the pictures of, ruined cities, that Trump is attempting to take political advantage of this. He runs basically on racism. Oh, Trump leading Florida Hispanic voters, likely voters, 45 to 43%. But Trump is a racist, says Molly Jong Fast. Imagine dating someone as racist as Tomi Lahren. Yeah. With women, politics so often comes down to, is this woman better looking than me? If she is, I hate her. Oh, yes, and we have this preposterous story where Donald Trump supposedly refused to visit a military cemetery, saying it's filled with losers. And furthermore, he referred to the more than 1,800 Marines who lost their lives at Belleau Wood as suckers for getting killed. If you believe that, you will believe anything. You hear about Trump sowing division in America. This division, of course, existed a long time before Trump appeared on the political scene. Elections were never nasty before. Well, in the 1952 election, Harry Truman, who was in a foul mood because the Democratic Party had made it clear they were not going to renominate him for president, accused General Dwight David Eisenhower, of sympathy with Nazism. Yes, he actually did this. You can go right back to the beginning of American elections and find out that American politics have always been nasty. They've always been nasty, but the decorum, the terrible lack of decorum, whine the people who have devoted decades to destroying decorum in all areas of life. Oh, Vice President Joe Biden and Dr. Jill Biden. Doctor of what? Today had a very engaging 90-minute in-person meeting with the Blake family, including Jacob's sisters. You get shot by the police and you become a saint. Oh, and to give you an idea of Molly Jong Fast's worldview, someone tweeted, New York residents, honest question, if indoor dining could resume tomorrow, how soon would you eat inside a restaurant? Let's say 25% maximum capacity for argument's sake. When I'm vaccinated, she replied. These people are going crazy. Cabin fever. They were halfway there already, but COVID-19 has given them the excuse to go right over the edge. I get the impression that they're enjoying this, strangely enough, that they're actually enjoying it because I'm going to drive myself insane in order to own Trump. Joy Reid, who is unaccountably a network anchor on MSNBC, she had tweeted on August the 29th, let me repeat this for those inventing the idea of Black Lives Matter riots. BLM doesn't riot. They march against police violence. And note that those caught setting fires, assaulting, and shooting people are consistently of the right, not the left. Again, do they really believe this? Well, I think they believe it and they don't believe it at the same time. Here's another tweet from Joy Reid. They are young white males, Durkin said. That Durkin would be the mayor of Seattle. They are not the acts of allies. These were acts of people who came with their own intention to destroy, to injure, and to cause chaos. I guess you would be referring to the Chaz or the Chop, which Mayor Durkin had earlier referred to as a block party. She actually said that. Then when the Indian immigrant council member on Seattle decided to invade City Hall with a mob and then lead a mob against Mayor Durkin's house, Mayor Durkin decided that she was going to change her mind. She was going to change her mind. Oh, and Joy Reid talks about Umbrella Man. Yes, the Antifa has been thoroughly infiltrated by extreme right-wingers, probably anti-vaxxers too. Representative Ilhan Omar accuses MSNBC host Joy Reid of Islamophobia after she compared radicalized Donald Trump supporters to the way Muslims act. Oh dear. Oh dear. She had said, when leaders, let's say in the Muslim world, talk a lot of violent talk and encourage their supporters to be willing to commit violence, including on their own bodies, in order to win against whoever they decide is the enemy, we in the US media describe that as they are radicalizing these people, particularly when they're radicalizing young people. That's how we talk about the way Muslims act. When you see what Donald Trump is doing, is that any different from what we describe as radicalizing people? Wow. Intersectionality. Don't you just love it? More, please. It's too funny. It's too funny. So are the riots going to help Donald Trump get reelected? Michael Tracy is not so sure. He writes in the New York Daily News, the easy assumption that continued civil strife, whether in Kenosha, Portland, or whatever city is next to convulse, will automatically benefit the reelection prospects of Trump, who promises law and order, does not align with my own personal observations. I'll concede up front that my personal observations are, by definition, anecdotal and can't possibly be perfectly representative of the entire electorate. But I did spend 2 months traveling across the continental United States with the explicit aim of speaking to a random assortment of people who'd been most directly affected by this summer's wave of riots. Don't you mean BLM peaceful protests, Michael Tracy? And over the course of that trip, I didn't encounter a single voter who proactively mentioned being suddenly motivated to support Trump as a result of the chaos and destruction. That doesn't mean the riots have had no political or cultural impact. If anything, the reverberations have been systematically underplayed by a national media which bends over backward to preserve the perceived moral sanctity of Black Lives Matter and its various nebulous offshoots. Accordingly, journalists have exhibited strangely little interest in examining the actual ideological underpinnings of the most widespread and sustained domestic unrest in the country in at least 50 years. All of this would be news to Paul Krugman. Here's some more election November 3rd doom for you. Washington Post ran a very strange story today. The election is likely to spark violent protests and a constitutional crisis. I'm reading for the summary here on RT.com. The Washington Post invited a group of anti-Trump pundits to predict the fallout from November's election, cue various visions of all-out violence, which can only be avoided, they claim, if Joe Biden wins by a landslide. What's the worst thing that could happen to our country during the presidential election? A Washington Post article published on Thursday opened. Georgetown law professor Rosa Brooks then proceeded to answer that question with the help of her colleagues at the Transition Integrity Project, a think tank put together last year to solve the hypothetical problem that President Donald Trump might reject a loss to Biden if voted out in November. Think tank or seditious conspiracy? You decide. The scenarios they came up with were unsurprisingly grim. In one, right-wing fake news site spread a rumor of Biden's death on election night, yet the venerable Democrat X out a narrow win. That's not what X out means, but never mind. In this case, Trump demands a recount, sends armed supporters into the street to clash with pro-Biden demonstrators, and attempts to deploy the U.S. military to crush his opposition. The president is eventually escorted out of office by the Secret Service, the narrative continues, but not until he pardons his family for some unknown crimes and burns, quote, incriminating documents, unquote. According to every scenario outlined, Trump is the villain. Trump's campaign calls for peaceful protests, while Trump encourages provocateurs to incite violence. Biden calls for a fair count of mail-in ballots, while Trump sends in the National Guard to destroy thousands of ballots in Democratic-leaning zip codes, to applause on social media from Trump supporters. The only scenario that would ensure a relatively overly transition of power, orderly rather, Brooks wrote, would be a landslide for Joe Biden. To those wondering how the tip could predict the actions of the Trump administration on election night and beyond, they simply asked anti-Trump pundit Bill Kristol and former Republican National Committee Chairman Michael Steele to play as the president. Both are outspoken critics of Trump, and their actions in the simulated election mirrored the standard never Trump view of the president as a dangerous tyrant bent on undoing American society. The article was met by disbelief by conservatives, many of whom saw it as an open threat of catastrophic violence if the public doesn't vote a certain way. Caleb Hull tweeted, so basically if Democrats don't get their way this election, they're going to attack you and burn down your city. Got it. Greg Price commented, the mafia was more subtle about their intentions. Molly Hemingway responded, problem for all the leftists pushing this clear blackmail threat of vote for us or have your country be violently destroyed is that it's an excellent argument against voting for them or giving them any power whatsoever. Curiously, the tip did not test a scenario in which Trump wins by a landslide, nor did the organization consider the possibility of a narrow Trump victory and a refusal by Biden to concede, a possibility raised by Hillary Clinton, who urged Biden last month not to concede under any circumstances and to launch a massive legal operation in the event of a narrow Trump win on election night. Regardless of the results, some top Democrats have called for continued unrest in the streets after November's election. Kamala Harris, Biden's running mate, said earlier this summer that the riots sweeping America are not going to stop for Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. They're not going to let up, and they should not. Yes, and she inserted the word beware into this prediction. Once again, nice country you got there. Shame if something happened to it. Let's go back to the chat. Tom Anderson says, KMG, did you hear about the humiliation ritual taking place at Northwestern University Law School recently? No, I did not. Glib Medley, every institution in America is born from the blood of white supremacist ideology and capitalism, and that's the disease, unquote. This is from the APA, the Guild of Clinical Psychologists in America. Chogokin 666, what is with people wearing masks in their bios and avatars? This strikes me as profoundly irritating. Perhaps there are people who believe that you can get COVID-19 from Twitter avatars. Apparently, there's no escape. There's no escape from the virus. We know that the people who get coronavirus typically have to spend quite a number of hours in close contact with someone who's infected. But no, we have to wear masks until the end of time because of the bedwetters. Emmett Kelly's Earth says, didn't Smith note that O'Brien clearly believed the photo of the original leaders of the revolution that exonerated them of treason did not exist, even though he'd held it just before he destroyed it? Yes, that's one of his tricks. How many fingers do you see? Yeah, you've seen it. Now I'm telling you it doesn't exist. Who do you believe, me or your lying eyes? This is the world we live in. Now, Debrea says 58% Hispanics for Trump is game over. What a nice fantasy, winning California. No, that's not gonna be possible for lots of reasons. One of which is that California is so corrupt. In many places, Republicans aren't even on the ballot. The rest of the ticket, because we'll just take the top two from the primary. A lot of voters wouldn't bother voting for Trump in California for the reason that it's a wasted vote. And two, because, there's no Republicans to vote for. Chogokin 666 says, Kevin, the cars at the beach were socially distanced in the parking lot. Not even kidding. Last night, I saw a mother in the driver's seat of a car. The car was parked, and she was wearing a mask, and she had a child in a car seat in the back, and the child was wearing a mask. Although I don't know how you could keep a mask on a child or a baby. they're just going to pull it off their face, or break it. But what is the point of this? How do these people think that, is she maintaining social distancing from her baby? Is that how it works? How is this baby fed via a 6 feet long tube? Is that how it works? Is there a burping machine that involves a mechanical hand that is 6 feet long? How about changing diapers? Well, that would be especially tricky. Tom Anderson explains, white students and professors at Northwestern Law School forced to open with "my name is blank and I'm a racist," followed by some sort of avowal to tackle white supremacy. They're going to get people to grovel. For how long? For how long? If the price of going to university is self-hatred, I'm sure there's plenty who'll sign on, but I suspect increasingly there are many more who will refuse to sign on, especially since teachers in person in the classroom, no, we can't have that. That would be dangerous. Deus ex suburbia says, I'm in Orange County, California. Lots of Republicans are fleeing. I'm very seriously thinking of doing the same. Job is the only thing keeping me here. Lady went swimming with visor, mask, and surgical gloves. We were calling her Daft Punk. That's from Jogokin 666. Deus ex suburbia explains, and by Republicans, I mean white people. Ha. We have to be punished. That's the idea. We had the fear of nuclear war, which rose to a fever pitch in the 1980s, even though this was the time of, Reagan's détente. There was this Australian doctor, Helen Caldicott, who terrified the world of nuclear winter. And there was the day after was shown on American TV, and Threads was shown on British TV. We're all going to die. And then Reagan negotiated peace with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union collapsed. And guess what? We got global warming. But global warming wasn't, before that, we had AIDS, which was going to kill everybody. And then it turned out that they were lying to us about how people get AIDS. And we got global warming, and global warming was just not a sell. Oh, it's going to get a little hotter in 50 years' time. And so that's a problem, because we have to wreck the economy for this, but they found a better way to wreck the economy: COVID-19. I'm sure it's a coincidence. I'm sure it is a coincidence. Emmett Kelly-Zur says there was a Wisconsin government department head who insisted that subordinates wear masks during Zoom meetings. The potential for violence here, very, very high. Yes, I found out. Yes, I mentioned that nonsense in Wisconsin some time ago. AOC says the world is going to end in 2030. No wonder the Dems kept her silent during the convention. Tom Anderson. If the world's going to end in 2030, what's the point of doing anything about it? COVID-19 might have unpredictable consequences. I've read a lot about the home front, Britain, during World War II. And, during the Blitz and other bombing campaigns, during the V1 and V2 rockets, there was this sense amongst a great many people that if the world is going to end, if I'm going to die, I might as well do exactly what I want right now. And so drinking, drug taking, fornication, adultery, nonstop partying. If there's no way out, well, why not just have a good time? And I don't know. That might be the long-term reaction to COVID-19. This may actually break the hold of the medical establishment. How many times do we have to be told that we're all going to die of something only to find out that it's not true, that it's been grossly exaggerated before people stop listening to medical experts entirely? Now, we're seeing this with the anti-vaxxer movement. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, okay? But it seems logical enough to me that, for instance, the medical community, the experts were telling us that saturated fat, they were so wicked, wicked, wicked. And it turns out they were lying to us. They were lying to us for more than half a century. And if you look at the food, all the various food scares that have been put out, I'm really not surprised that a lot of people have given up listening to experts, actually more to the point that they believe the opposite of whatever the experts say. Okay, I want to talk about a column by Steve Saylor called Just Knock It Off, which is rather shocking to read because we've all become inured to lies by now, that we're all expected to lie about certain topics. And Saylor isn't having it. Live not by lies, as Solzhenitsyn said. He writes in Attacky Mag, this week the mainstream media finally grudgingly admitted the possibility of what I've been hollering for 3 months, that their declaration of a racial reckoning has unleashed destruction and mayhem across America. While most of the press's attention is focused on a handful of whites shooting other whites over politics, the statistically much bigger phenomenon all summer has been the Black Lives Matter inspired rise in black-on-black shootings. For example, the number of shooting victims in New York City so far this year is up 95% over 2019. While the press is now harping on supposed right-wing violence, there probably aren't a lot of violent Trumpists in the Bronx. What about elsewhere? National crime data trickles in slowly, but one useful source is the Wikipedia page on mass shootings, defined as incidents in which 4 or more people were struck by bullets, but not necessarily killed. With 1 day left in August, the total number of mass shootings in the US since June 1st is 257, up 72% from 149 in 2019's same period. Fortunately, these huge increases in total number of people shot may not translate into equally immense increases in murders, because 2020 shooters don't seem as efficient at killing people. Fewer people appear to be dying per person shot this year. For example, murders are up only 35% in New York City due to a decline in marksmanship among Gotham's would-be assassins. This suggests that a large fraction of the Summer of George's incremental shootings are by blacks, who historically have had the lowest ratio of kills to wounded. Contrary to what you might assume from watching rap videos, holding your gun sideways doesn't actually help you shoot straight. There's another reason for the decline in deaths from shooting, is because techniques that were perfected on battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan have been transferred to American hospitals and EMT workers. Saylor continues, although the national press has promoted the idea that almost all mass shootings are carried out by white male terrorists with rifles in schools or churches, those are rare, although horrifically lethal when they do happen. That's because the prototypical white mass shooting is carried out by a lone gunman bent on suicide or life in prison, who sticks around to finish off the wounded because he has made up his mind he's not going home ever. These leave more dead, fewer wounded. In contrast to suicidal white mass shootings, black shootings tend toward the homicidal. Several handgun-armed young men shoot up a picnic or block party intending to kill someone in the crowd with whom they are angry, and then they run off, figuring if they lie low at their grandma's house for a few days, it'll all blow over. Many of those shot are merely bystanders whom the shooters don't bother to hunt down because they didn't have much in the way of hard feelings toward them in the first place. They just happen to be, as they so often say, in the wrong place at the wrong time. These kinds of mass shootings cause fewer dead but more wounded. The third kind of mass shooting, which few talk about, is domestic murder suicides. The more you read up on black shootings, the more pointless and stupid they seem, which is in a way good news. These aren't inevitable tragedies that are fated by the inexorable laws of the universe. They're just dumb decisions made by people who haven't been taught by society just how ridiculous their values and behavior are. There's a win-win solution out there that nobody is talking about. Blacks could improve the attitudes of others toward them by rectifying their actions. The wise social scientist James Q. Wilson summed up a lifetime of studying crime in 2002 thus: a central problem, perhaps the central problem, in improving the relationship between white and black Americans is the difference in racial crime rates. Black men commit murders at a rate almost 8 times greater than that of white men. Hence, the Saylor continues, hence the single most effective way to improve America's race problem would be for blacks to stop killing people so much. For instance, do you want cops to be gentler with blacks? Do you want more integration of neighborhoods? Then give the police and neighbors less good reason to fear blacks' violent impulsiveness. How can America encourage African Americans to be more law-abiding? The first step when you find yourself in a hole is to stop digging. The current national orgy of excuse-making and praise for blacks is exacerbating their already severe self-destructiveness. The second step is to tell the truth about black crime. The third step is for government, media, and institutions to encourage blacks to reform. In 2018, blacks were per capita 7.9 times more likely to be murder offenders than the rest of the US population, which includes 60 million Hispanics. That is a ridiculous ratio. I'm sorry, but it is time to stop excusing away the absurdly high rate of black criminality as an inevitable outcome of poverty or systemic racism or whatever, and start asking blacks to just knock it off. At present, contrary to most assumptions, black men are much more criminally inclined than white men at all levels of income. Harvard economist Raj Chetty discovered that black men who grew up in families in the 99th percentile of income for the whole population, not the black population, but the fabled 1% overall, were as likely to be as imprisoned as white men who grew up at only the 34th percentile. That ought to be embarrassing for blacks, but the New York Times headlined Chetty's findings as extensive data shows punishing reach of racism for black boys. Mexican Americans are about as poor as African Americans, but the murder rate is notably lower. It's hard to get reliable figures on Latino crime rates because many American police departments still don't break out Hispanics as a separate category from whites. But whatever it is clearly only a fraction of the black rate. Is it unreasonable to call on African Americans to lower their murder rate to the Mexican American level? Or are blacks just genetically fated to have a vastly higher murder rate? Maybe, but cultures have reformed themselves over time, especially if assisted by carrots and sticks from the outside. For instance, the Chinese American murder rate is minuscule today, but was the highest in San Francisco during the 19th century Tang Wars. Note that the murder rate today is extremely high in El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, quite high in Mexico, higher than among Mexican Americans, and not at all that terrible in Costa Rica and Nicaragua. It appears that Latin Americans tend to react to historical circumstances, such as the perceived legitimacy of the government and the shift of cocaine trafficking away from Colombia in the 1990s. But a large fraction of American black-on-black killings aren't due to wars between international cartels over vast profits, but are instead over petty disputes. The Los Angeles Times' homicide reporter Jill Levy recounted in her 2015 book Genocide that in South Central, quote, debts and competition over goods and women, especially women, drove many killings. But insults, snitching, drunken antics, and the classic unwanted party guests also were common homicide motives, unquote. I have read Jill Levy's book, Genocide, and it is a real eye-opener. I talked about it on my old podcast with Kevin Steele. Essentially, what the book says is that everybody in the inner city in Los Angeles, they all know murderers. They're all connected to murderers, and they don't snitch on them. Everybody know, but snitches get stitches. And I'm afraid the situation isn't going to change until the people change. If they're going to allow murderers to get away scot-free, well, then why would they expect the murder rate to go down? I'm really tired of these campaigns against violence as if it descends from the sky. Or we hear these pitiful stories about children killed with a hail of bullets or, a bullet bouncing off a wall or some such. Again, they know who did this, but they never get turned in, or very rarely. Saylor continues, my guess is that there are some low-hanging fruit in contemporary African-American culture, absurdly dysfunctional tendencies that should and could be made taboo. For example, there should be a cultural prescription on the disgraceful practice of shooting up funerals and other memorial services. Self-respecting criminals should be ashamed to do that. For example, on August 22nd, Harry Siegel of the New York Daily News reported, quote, an 18-year-old with a 2-week-old baby was shot dead Wednesday just outside Prospect Park on his way to a vigil for a 42-year-old who'd been shot dead Sunday after he'd gone to a vigil for a 28-year-old who'd been shot dead the previous Wednesday. If this chain of memorial murders were a virus, it would have a R naught of 1.0. Mayors and governors could help blunt the current spike in black-on-black carnage by announcing that the bans on large gatherings due to the pandemic apply to Black funerals too. But as we saw with the immense George Floyd and John Lewis funeral orgies, those rules don't seem to apply to Blacks. In the long run, we could have laws preventing males between, say, 13 and 35 from attending memorial services for murdered gang members. Would it hurt to get the message across to young knuckleheads that their funerals will be inglorious? From not shooting up funerals, we could then move on in baby steps to establishing a new norm that it is disgusting to shoot at somebody in a crowd rather than to wait until he's alone. But eventually, stop thinking you need to kill a guy for dissing you. You feel mad at the moment, but in the long run, you will be okay. In contrast, your committing murder brings shame on your race. Instead, however, our society has been pushing in the opposite direction, promoting in Blacks an ever-growing sense of megalomania and impunity. How's that working out for us? And how's that working out for Toronto? Diversity. Toronto's all about diversity. And that's the motto. Diversity is right in the motto of Toronto. And let's see, a brazen shooting at a bakery in Toronto's Little Jamaica neighborhood has left 6 people wounded. Police say at least one of the victims was the intended target of this gang-related shooting. The others were innocent bystanders. Person in a car empties a pistol at a bunch of people in a bakery. This is exactly the sort of thing that Steve Saylor was talking about. This is absolutely despicable behavior from the male. A man in his 30s is shot dead after 2 men ambush him as he gets into his car on a Toronto street. This is from June, and this is the way that Toronto is going, but, Black Lives Matter. And in fact, the Toronto Star, as I mentioned a couple of days ago, ran an op-ed from Royce and James, which pretty much said, give BLM whatever it wants or Toronto gets it. It was a death threat disguised as an op-ed. This is off topic here, but I felt the need to mention it. It's from Breitbart. Susan Berry. California lawmakers passed a bill Monday that would reduce penalties for adults who have oral or anal sex with a willing minor child if the sex offender is within 10 years of the age of the victim. Willing. Okay. Last night, the California state legislature passed SB 145, and now goes to Governor Newsom. It would lower the penalties for adults who have sex with willing same-sex minors. Judge could decide if adult has to register as sex offender if the offender is within 10 years of age of victim. And this was proposed by Senator Scott Wiener, who is a homosexual, and he has an enormous mask covering his face and nose in his Twitter avatar. He tweeted that SB 145 ends discrimination against alphabet people, young people on California sex offender registry. It treats alphabet people exactly how straight people are now treated. The bill is the subject of a massive misinformation campaign by MAGA QAnon. Scott Wiener is very, very upset because apparently people have said mean things to him. Oh, and PolitiFact weighs in, concluding the claims that SB 145 legalizes pedophilia are false. Well, no, you see, if it's willing, right? How could it be pedophilia if it's willing? Yeah. Look, we know what the end game is here. I don't need to spell it out. That, that which was once forbidden will become legalized, and then it will become celebrated, and we all shall be compelled to celebrate it, lest we be canceled That's certainly what's happened in Canada, where it's march in the Pride Parade or else, which leads to the hilarious consequence of the so-called social conservative stalwart, Jason Kenney, my old friend who's now Premier of Alberta, begging to be included in last year's Pride Parade in Edmonton, and them turning him down, saying they're going to have to show a lot more evidence of their allyship before we let them march in our parade. Yeah, in other words, come on, beg to be able to march in the Pride Parade. You're not begging hard enough. Let's see. Willing Minor, Metatron says, Scott Wiener, LOL, the universe has a sense of humor at least. Yeah. Brandon Smith says, I heard Batman caught COVID. He was wearing his mask wrong. Meanwhile, Bane is still COVID-free. David Wright, if The Rock can get COVID, what hope is there for all of us? We have a pun from Chogakin666. I'd like to catch Corvid because a pet raven would be cool. Apparently, ravens can be made into pets. I don't know. This sounds like it would be exhausting, but I might have mentioned this before, but it's such an amusing story that Alec Douglas Hume, who was briefly Prime Minister of Great Britain after Harold Macmillan went to Eton, and there was a master there who kept a tame raven on a perch beside his desk, and if one of the boys angered him, he would point at the boy and the raven would fly over, perch on it, and peck at the boy's head, which is, that is a certainly unusual discipline. I don't know, I find it very, very funny. Very funny indeed. Glib Medley makes a comment about memorial service. Look, who brings a gun to a funeral? Who brings a gun to a baptism? Who brings a gun to, Chuck E. Cheese? Why would you do that? Glib Medley says, my Anglophilia slipped considerably when Blair introduced Cool Britannia. Well, I don't know. It didn't really work out very well for Tony Blair, did it? Seeing as that he is one of the most hated men in Britain. In fact, Armando Iannucci predicted this was going to happen in his series Time Trumpet, which was set 30 years in the future, where they had people portraying famous people of the present, and they were going to show them in the future. And Alistair Campbell was saying about Tony Blair, I never really liked him anyway. And it caused a lot of problems for people. Tony Blair, I never said anything good about Tony Blair. Well, actually, you did here. Here's the chapter and verse. That's a lie. You're making that up. I was always against Tony Blair. Okay, so what do we have next? Oh, let's talk about Jessica Krug. And I'm going to ask the question that if a man can decide that he has been assigned the wrong gender at birth and is actually a woman, and if a woman can decide that she was assigned the wrong gender at birth and is actually a man, why is it so outrageous for a white person can claim to be black? And this is a serious question. Of course, another question is, since gender is a social construct that is meaningless, when these people say that they were wrongly assigned gender and now they're the correct gender, what do they mean by that? Literally, what do they mean by that? But anyway, let's go to see what heavy.com has to say about Jessica Krug. Is she wearing a nose ring in this picture? Oh, she's got the massive hoop earrings. I know that black women like that. Jessica Krug, also known as Jess La Bombalera. Yeah, that wasn't a tip-off. is a white woman, writer, and associate professor of history at George Washington University who is admitted to pretending to be Black. Krug exposed herself in a Medium essay titled The Truth and the Anti-Black Violence of My Lies, posted September 3rd. The 38-year-old Krug asked for people to cancel her, saying, "I'm not a culture vulture, I am a culture leech." Krug said she grew up as a white Jewish child in Kansas City, but has assumed various Black identities throughout adulthood. To an escalating degree over my adult life, I have eschewed my lived experience, I'm so tired of that phrase, as a white Jewish child in suburban Kansas City under various assumed identities within a Blackness that I had no right to claim. First North American Blackness, then US-rooted Blackness, is there a difference? Then the Caribbean-rooted Bronx Blackness, again, what? She wrote in the Medium post, "I have not only claimed these identities as my own when I had absolutely no right to do so." Krug, who taught 6 classes at George Washington, is a historian of politics, ideas, and cultural practices in Africa and the African diaspora, her page reads. She is deeply interested in intellectual histories of those who never wrote documents and the use of embodied knowledge for both research and teaching. Does embodied knowledge mean telling tall tales? I'm getting that impression. Krug's 2018 book, Fugitive Modernities. Doesn't that sound like a, Fugitive Modernities sound like a pretentious art rock band, you know, along the lines of Montreal or the like. Politics and Identity Outside the State in Kisama, Angola, and the Americas was published through Duke University Press. Krug, who graduated with a PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2012, is planning on releasing a second Fathers of No Nation. Again, alt-rock band or Black Studies book. Heavy reached out to George Washington University and Krug for comment, but did not immediately hear back. Krug says she's been struggling with mental health issues. There's a shocker. At the beginning of her essay, Krug said she has gaslighted the people she loved. Krug then wrote that she has struggled with mental health demons throughout her life. Quote, "Mental health issues likely explained why I assumed a false identity initially as a youth and why I continued and developed it for so long. The mental health professionals from whom I have been so belatedly seeking help assure me that this is a common response to some of the severe trauma that marked my early adulthood and teen years," unquote. But mental health issues can never, will never, neither explain nor justify nor condone nor excuse that, in spite of knowingly and regularly critiquing any and every non-Black person who appropriates from Black people, my false identity was crafted entirely from the fabric of Black lives. Shouldn't she have said the bodies of Black lives, Black bodies? That I claimed belonging with living people and ancestors to whom and for whom my being is always a threat at best and a death sentence at worst. This chutzpah. Okay, here's a fake, a complete fake, but she's going to let everyone know just how awful white people are. That white people are always a threat at best and a death sentence at work. Of course, it never works the other way around. She continued, "I have thought about ending these lies many times over many years, but my cowardice was always more powerful than my ethics. I know right from wrong. I know history. I know power. I am a coward." Then she said it a second time. "I am a coward. There is no ignorance, no innocence, nothing to claim, nothing to defend. I have moved wrong in every way for years." Jess Le Bombera. Yeah, okay. Krug wants to take accountability for what she's done and wrote that this should result in her being canceled. Or, you know, she could simply just disappear. You know, she could just quietly sneak away from George Washington. Presumably she's got some money saved up. I'm sure she's fairly well paid. And she could just, you know, hide out for a while. And if she's darkening her skin, which I assume that she is, she could simply stop darkening it, stop dyeing her hair. I believe in restorative justice where possible, even when and where I don't know what that means or how it could work. I believe in accountability, and I believe in cancel culture as a necessary and righteous tool for those with less structural power to wield against those with more power. Oh no, what? But this is wielded against a woman who rose in the world because she pretended to be black. There are many, many people with PhDs who cannot find work in the academy, especially at places as highly ranked as George Washington. So who's benefiting from privilege here? Social media users have compared her to Rachel Dolezal. And again, I don't know, I'm looking at a picture, there's various pictures of Jessica Krug. In this one, she's holding up a copy of Fugitive Modernities, and I don't know. I suppose anyone can be black. If you're 1/8, 1/16, 1/64 black, you can claim to be black. You want to go back far enough. One of those people was bad feminist writer Roxane Gay, who tweeted, "Wait, Rachel Dolezal has a sister named Jessica Krug. How many more of these people out there are there other than Talcum X?" Ooh, ouch. And I think this apology is BS. The self-flagellation is absurd and a performance. I believe in apologies and redemption. This one checks all the boxes, says the right things, but it doesn't feel genuine, and I actually don't care. I've never heard of this person. Ooh, sick burn. I think her lie is weird and pathetic. I will forget about this in an hour. It's just such a self-serving apology. Krug, yes, she does have a ring in her nose. She testified before the New York City Council in June using the Jess La Bombalera alias. It's just, so no one said to her, come on, you made that up, right? You're not really called Jess La Bombalera, right? Come on. She testified before New York City Council in June. She used a fake accent as shown in the YouTube video. So I got a couple of things to say. And when y'all tell me my time stops, fuck out of here. I also want to call out these white New Yorkers who waited for hours to speak to us and did not yield their time to black and brown indigenous New Yorkers. Okay, so indigenous has been redefined now. She went on to talk about racial inequality and gentrification and called to abolish the New York City Police Department. The police are a colonial occupation force. If the city is for us, the NYPD cannot stay. Let's see. Osama bin Laden talked about the strong horse and the weak horse. And he was talking about this in the context of the Muslim struggle against the West, against the Crusaders. And he said that people are drawn to the strong horse and they are not drawn to the weak horse. And I think this is why people like Jessica Krug make these decisions. Because if being white is so awful that, it's a death threat to others, the cancer on the human race, as Susan Sontag infamously put it, well, then why wouldn't these people want to become black? Because what we have learned in 2020 is that black people are holy, that they're holy. If your son gets shot up by cops after resisting arrest and going for a knife after attempting to kidnap his children, then the father of this person becomes holy and then is able to mystify Anderson Cooper by speaking about Brussels sprouts on CNN. What's up with what happened to Rachel Dolezal? She was charged by the state of Washington with felony theft by welfare fraud and second-degree perjury in May 2018. The matter was settled in a diversion agreement. She agreed to repay the welfare funds and to perform community service. So is that the last that we have heard of her? The diversion agreement was March 25th, 2019. She agreed to repay her assistance benefits and complete 120 hours of community service to avoid a trial. This took almost a year for this to be agreed. They sure move slow. And let's talk about USC. All of these stories sound made up. But of course, 2020 is the year when if you see a story that looks totally made up, you know that it must be true. A University of Southern California professor is taking a short-term pause after video of a recent class lecture surfaced. This is from Ben Zeisloft of Campus Reform. In the video, the professor is heard saying a Chinese filler word, which sounds like an English language racial slur. During a recent online class, Greg Patton, who is an expert in communication, interpersonal, and leadership effectiveness, according to his faculty bio, explained the usage of a Chinese filler word for that, comparing it to the usage of like, and other American filler words. Yeah, okay. What slur is it? Can this even be alluded to, or is the word so nuclear that to even suggest what it is would be too powerful? It might cause the sensitive people to faint or start bleeding from the nose. On Tuesday evening, the USC Marshall School of Business provided Campus Reform with a statement confirming that Patton is no longer teaching his course. Recently, a USC faculty member during class used a Chinese word that sounds similar to a racial slur in English. We acknowledge the historical, cultural, and harmful impact of racist language, the statement read. Patton agreed to take a short-term pause while we are reviewing to better understand the situation and to take any appropriate next steps. Another instructor is temporarily teaching the class. USC is now offering supportive measures to any student, faculty, or staff member who requests assistance. The school is committed to building a culture of respect and dignity where all members of our community can feel safe, supported, and can thrive. Does this include ritual humiliation of white students, male students? Is that part of their safe, supportive, and thriving campus? Yes, you will remember what Washington, D.C. was a city councilor, got in enormous trouble. What was this, a couple of decades ago for using the word niggardly? And I suppose that was considered to be the last word, right? Well, there never is, because so many words since then have been exiled from the language because they offend certain people. Disabled, you know. Are you suggesting that a blind person is somehow missing something? Oh, but they're not? Oh, I shouldn't have said that. I'm very, very, very sorry. What are we supposed to call them? Differently abled. That one was trotted around for a while, and then it became the subject of mockery. Perhaps the subject is simply entirely avoided now. Okay. Yeah, I wanted to talk about the feminization of religion. And you've all seen it. I've seen it in the Catholic Church. If there's any members of mainline churches who listen to these live streams, they've seen it. And evangelicals have seen it. There's a very amusing Twitter account called Susan from the Parish Council. That's @FromParish. I noticed this in the 1970s, that the Catholic parishes that I knew in Vancouver, they were completely dominated by bossy women. And the priests all seemed to be terrified of these women and their liturgy teams and faith teams and music teams and the like. She describes herself as happy to serve the Lord as parish council president for our new Z Church cluster. Thank you, Spirit, for so many blessings. Love my 2 kids and their fur babies. Yes, and the pinned tweet is, I must announce that Our Lady of Angels School and Holy Cross School will be closing. There is simply not enough funding. In unrelated news, Bishop Pat's office and residence is being renovated for $3.4 million. Please prayerfully consider donating to this project. People in Dallas don't care about what is happening to Lake Charles, but Susan cares. Yes, and here is a new back and forth litany. The Lord be with you and with your spirit. Pull up your masks. We pull them up for the Lord. Yeah. Someone tweeted, literally just read an email where one of the blue hairs made a veiled threat to a priest who wasn't forcing everyone to wear masks. She says, I just hope he doesn't get in trouble. Who do you think you are, Susan? She responded, that's a nice priest you've got there. It would be shame if someone called the bishop. And there was a book by Leon Podles that was published a few years ago on the subject of feminization. It was called The Church Impotent. And he noted that over a period of years, well, over centuries, that everything masculine has been removed from the church. And we see similar complaints of what's happening in the evangelical church. It's an essay on mere orthodoxy by Anthony Bradley, who writes, for many years, researchers pondered the growing absence of men in conservative Protestant churches, especially evangelical churches. In fact, losing men has been a problem for Christian denominations since the late 19th century, which ushered in an era of muscular Christianity as a way to win men back to the church. Men were falling away from church life as sedentary life was becoming an industrial revolution norm due to advances in technology and improving economic mobility. Religious leaders introduced sports, fitness, adventure, and social justice as ways to reconnect boys and men to the church. This explains the partnering of church life with the YMCA, the Boy Scouts, outdoor camps, and enlisting men in the social gospel movement. Over the past 20 years, much ink has been spilled, raising alarms about the feminization of the church in evangelical circles as a way to explain the absence of men. Women naturally balk at these accusations because it's hard to conceptualize a feminized church when most, if not all, of the leaders are men. I believe this discrepancy makes sense because we have not been using the tools of human anthropology to analyze our society. Evangelical churches are actually not patriarchal, even with mostly male leaders, nor are they feminized. They do not emasculate men in order to appeal to women's sensibilities or desires. Feminized is the wrong word to describe the sermon content, music styles, programs, decor, and the like of many evangelical churches. The study of human anthropology provides another possibility. Evangelical churches are, in fact, matrilineal. I don't know, it seems to me, certainly from what I've seen on TV, that the leadership of evangelical congregations is male overwhelmingly, but there always seems to be a wife there at the side, and the man is always looking to approval from his wife, who is typically or often a partner in these ventures. He explains systems of behaviors that bias investment towards matrilineally related kin. Our definition includes inheritance of resources, rank, title, or information, and other forms of cooperation that are biased towards matrilineally related kin. The focus on observable behavior separates our definition from more ambiguous metrics of matrilineality, such as corporate descent, which arguably apply only to humans, and while affording greater opportunities for certain forms of cooperation among relatives, do not preclude alternatives. Finally, our definition requires observation of actual behaviors as opposed to stated norms. Kinship behaviors frequently contradict stated norms, and natural selection acts on behaviors, not stated norms, because enacting norms through behaviors is what generates differential fitness outcomes. In a matriarchy, women hold the highest levels of authority and social power. Matriarchal women are outward-facing representatives of the community. In matrilineal societies, by contrast, the outward-facing office does not determine which gender is socially dominant. As Sarah Lowes observes, men often retain positions of power and authority within the kin group. Men may hold an office, but women control the operations of community life. Just as I mentioned, the worship team, the liturgy team, the music team, or whatever in the Catholic Church, these are all dominated by bossy women. I'm going to move on to Theater Thursday. Just let me check the chat first. Angry Persian Michelin guy says to Glib Medley, I hope you're okay. Please be mispal for me. I have been doing the Ribono Shell Olam, and it has been really helping me. So thank you for the tip. It really works. Okay. Okay. And there's a bunch of private stuff there that I won't get into. Reston Shackelford, I remember when my prof said what NWA meant in class. No one had a problem. Better days. You know, we went from the word, and then we went to putting it within inverted commas, and then we went to the N-word, and now we have got to the point where we can't even allude to the N-word anymore, as in that campus reform story, because that would simply be too damaging. Okay, so let's go to Theater Thursday. Heck McNeck, I don't know whether he's with us today. He saw this movie at my invitation. I promised to watch Roger Rabbit. It was sort of a swap there. And he was telling people yesterday in the chat not to watch this movie. It is called Come and See. And it is a Soviet film that was released in 1985. It was held up for some years by the authorities because of various objections that they had to it being too vulgar, etc. The phrase "come and see" it comes from the Apocalypse of St. John, or the book of Revelation, chapter 6, verses 7 and 8. And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, Come and see. And behold, a pale horse, and he that sat upon him, his name was Death, and hell followed him. And power was given to him over the four parts of the earth, to kill with sword, with famine, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. This movie depicts an apocalyptic situation, which is the invasion, occupation of what used to be called White Russia and is now called Belarus or Belarus during the Second World War by German troops, and the attempts of partisans to evict the Germans from their homeland. People have strong reactions to this film, which was directed by Elim Klimov and co-written by him. They'll talk about the violence of the film. It's not like a Quentin Tarantino film, though. It is not, we're not seeing people tortured for our amusement. There is not a lot of, blood sprays and viscera, brain on the walls, that sort of thing. I suppose the violence is the violence directed at the two leads of this, Fleora and Glasha. They are children, really. And Fleora, who is played by Alexei Kravchenko, is a 14-year-old boy who decides that he is going to join the Partisans. Now, there's no father in the house, whether he's joined the Partisans or he has been called up for military service in the Red Army. It's not made clear. There is not a lot of narrative exposition in this movie, which I always think is a good thing. The movie does not stop and explain over and over again who this person is or why this is happening. At the beginning, we see Fleora. He's dressed in what is clearly his father's suit. It is several sizes too big for him, but again, the movie does not tell us that this is his father's suit, but I mean, it's fairly obvious. And he has decided to join the Partisans, and his mother, who is looking after Fleora, and he has twin younger sisters, she is horrified. She becomes hysterical at this. At one point, she hands him an axe and says, "Why don't you just kill us now?" And the implication is clear. that when the German authorities find out that this boy has joined the partisans, they will kill the rest of the family in retaliation. In any case, this becomes a moot point because as we move through this movie, we understand the truth, which was that the Germans were intent on a genocide of the white Russians. We learn at the end of the movie that 268 entire villages were destroyed and all the inhabitants slaughtered by the Germans during the period of the Second World War. So Fliora is pretty impressed with himself. He managed to secure a rifle. He was digging in a sand dune. And the movie, right from the beginning, it adopts the Authoritarian, the distancing, the alienation, feeling of otherness. Because we have two boys, we have Fliora and a younger boy, and they're digging, they're looking for weapons. Well, we find that eventually, but why are they digging? And there's a man telling them to stop. Who is this man, and why is he telling them to stop? And we see a same plane, a Focke-Wulf 189. It's a reconnaissance aircraft, and we see it, again, just a single plane in the sky. The Germans are always watching. They're even watching two boys digging in the dunes. So we meet the partisans, and they're a pretty rough and ready bunch. They have, 100, 150 men fitted with the various types of rifles. They don't have uniforms, and their state of their clothing is often deplorable. And what do they have in the way of weapons? Well, they have an armored personnel carrier, which is dragging a single artillery piece. Not much of a match for the Wehrmacht or the SS. One might think that this is it's really a suicide mission, one might think. But Fliora thinks it is absolutely delightful. It reminded me somewhat of Eric Rohmer's film Percival, where similarly we see a naive young man or boy actually deciding that he wants to be a knight, as his father was, even though his mother does everything she can to stop him from this course. So Fliora notices there is a exceedingly attractive young woman, just a girl really, called Glasha, and she is wearing a formal green dress, which appears to be made of silk or some such fabric. It's never really, it's not explained who she is. Now, apparently she was going to be deported to Germany, and the leader of the partisans, named Kosach, supposedly rescued her. Is she a camp follower? Is she the prostitute for the partisans? It's not made clear, but it's obvious that she is in love with Kosach. And interesting thing about the dress, that this movie has been described as surrealistic, and it absolutely is so. There are many things in the movie which appear to change, and there's no logical reason for the change. For instance, this green dress of Glasha's at one point becomes black for the longest time. And now one could say it's because the dress got wet, but it is so black that it appears to be a mourning garment. We see a stork in the forest in Belarusia, a stork of the kind that one would expect to find in, say, Africa. And it makes no sense. And we're clearly being led to believe that the effects of war are hallucinogenic, that in a world that has gone mad, that it is really impossible to say what is real and what is not real. Now, Fliora is humiliated because at the very last moment, before the partisans are about to march off to battle, he is told that he has to stay behind because he has to switch boots with one of the hardened partisans, one of whose boot has completely, fallen to pieces. And he acts much like one would expect a 14-year-old to do in that situation. He is consumed with self-pity, and he wanders off weeping, where he comes upon Glasha, who laughs at him, which makes him angrier still. But eventually he sees the humor in the situation, and he laughs. He laughs with her. And there is quite a romantic scene, a calm before the storm, where there is an attack, an aerial attack by the Germans, and he is deafened. Fleora is deafened by the bombs, which happens later again. And the next day, there is a sun shower, and we see Glasha and Fleora cleaning themselves with the branches, the wet branches of trees and the leaves. And Glasha does a little dance on top of a suitcase. And she talks about how she wants to have children one day. Now, they decide that they are going to, or Fleora decides that he is going to rescue his mother and his sisters. And it's at this point that the movie becomes very dark indeed, and remains so until the end. The hut that they live in is deserted, and Glasha sees the twins' toys on the floor with flies buzzing around it. Flies are omnipresent in this film. They seem to cover every surface, every person. She realizes what's up, and she vomits. And they leave the house. Fleora he thinks he knows. There's an island in a bog. And Glasha looks, and she sees that they're dead, that the Germans have massacred everyone in the village, including his mother and his sisters. But he insists on dragging Glasha through this bog, where she nearly drowns several times. And he's deaf, and he can't. He's lost his mind, or he's close to losing his mind. But again, in a situation where the world has gone mad, he's certainly no madder than anyone else. He eventually he and Glasha find a group of partisans hiding in the woods. Well, not partisans, sorry, I mean villagers, peasants. And they are building the strangest thing. They are building an effigy of Adolf Hitler. Now, this movie was originally called Kill Hitler, but the authorities did not like that title. And it's on a stick. It's kind of on a pole, and they have got a skull, which they decorate, using mud and cut off hair. That is to say, Fleora's hair. His hair had been quite long, juvenile style, and he becomes much older looking immediately when his hair is roughly cut. And they use this to make a rather realistic effigy of Hitler, which they start parading around with, that they're going to put this in such a place that it is going to infuriate the Germans, which seems a very vain, strange thing to do. 4 of them go off looking for food. 2 are killed by a mine. And then a man who is described as Fleora's uncle, whether he is actually his uncle or whether he is just a friendly mentor figure, is never made clear. There is quite astonishing shots which seem strangely beautiful, ironically beautiful, where Fleora is hiding behind a cow, a dead cow, as tracer bullets fly over his head. And these were live rounds, apparently in the shooting, 6 inches above his head. And it is strangely beautiful. There's much, much beauty in this film, particularly the use of natural light, on fog, say. The Germans seem to have the ability to simply materialize. That's how it appears. There's the fog covering everything, and there are the Germans. So Aglasha and Florian are rescued. They were going to steal from a farmer, or he was going to steal from a farmer, and the farmer takes him in, and he says, one of the young is dead, and you can assume his identity. Well, from the frying pan into the fire, because the Germans show up, and they decide to drink all the liquor in the house. They're having a great time, and the farmer, the villagers have to demonstrate that they haven't been cheating the Germans out of agricultural produce. It's all just a ruse. It's just a ruse. They're all being led to a spot and forced into a building where they are going to be burned to death. And Glasha manages to escape. We also see the antics of at least two White Russian quislings who are, they're most despicable characters in the film. Later, they claim, "Oh no, we're not German. We're not German." Yes, well, that makes it worse. What you're doing, doesn't it? The tales in this movie were inspired by a book of real-life events about the German occupation. And it's a very strange thing that when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union, they were met by many in the Ukraine and in White Russia who hailed them as liberators. And the Wehrmacht was quite pleased by this. Obviously, it greased the skids, but the word had come from Nazi headquarters that these people were subhuman, literally subhuman, should be treated as such, and should be exterminated in order to create Lebensraum for Germans. At the end of the movie, or near the end of the movie, we see the highest-ranking military officer he's begging for his life, and we're just following orders. Then we see another soldier who simply he comes right out with it. Some races do not deserve to live, and your race is one of them. He knows that he's going to die, but he seems quite pleased with himself because he's done, all that he can do in order to remove a subhuman race. And I suppose that the nature of the kind of violence that we saw in the Second World War, it's how arbitrary it was, which makes it mad. That of course there had been many ugly wars in the past. World War I, the vast slaughter of the 30 Years' War in the 17th century, but this extermination for racial reasons, with no escape possible, was something new in history. And the extermination scene, is exceedingly hallucinogenic. Again, the Germans are getting liquored up, scampering around. The Ukrainian quislings come very near to death on several occasions. We see Glasha, who it's not made clear again that this is Glasha, but from what we learn, it's almost certainly her. We see her dragged by her hair by a German soldier and thrown into a truck where it is clear that she is going to be gang raped. And we see her afterwards where it is obvious what has happened to her. But again, the nature of the violence in this film is not, we are going to show you, we're going to show you exactly what happens. No, we have a couple hundred villagers burned alive. There are no shots from within the building. as they are being asphyxiated and burned to death. We see a man who's been set on fire by the Germans, and we see his charred body. He is close to death, but in terms of visceral horror, that is as strong as it gets. Again, I must stress that the reason that so many people have such strong and often negative reactions to this film is because it shows the effect of violence on what are, in effect, children. That we see Fliora at the beginning, where he is this handsome, naive boy with long hair, and by the end, his hair is cut almost to the scalp, or actually to the scalp, and he appears to have aged 30 or 40 years. He has seen too much. Now, the Germans get their comeuppance, and again, this seems strange because when you look at the partisans that I talked about before, again, they have one small piece of artillery and not much in the way of firepower. I don't know, perhaps the Germans simply got so drunk and became so obsessed with rape that they weren't paying attention. But we see there's another strange detail in this scene. We see a beautiful young woman sitting in the passenger seat in a German army truck, and she's dressed, she's wearing an officer's uniform. And later we see her eating lobster. It's clearly not possible. But again, this movie seeks to disorient the viewer, and it succeeds magnificently in that. The ending of the movie is quite controversial, perhaps more controversial than the movie itself. We see a portrait of Hitler with the Cyrillic lettering, which had been made to inform the White Russians that Hitler was their friend. And we see Fliora, who decides to metaphorically kill Hitler through this portrait. And then we see a lot of stock footage of German troops in the Second World War. And then we see Nuremberg rallies and the like. And we see Hitler's rise to power. And it's all going backwards, all to Hitler as a baby, whereupon Fliora starts to weep. And perhaps this is one of the reasons that the Soviet authorities did not like this film, is because the clear implication is that all of this horror was the result of the evil of one man. Now, I suspect that the Soviet line is rather different, or yes, that this was inevitable, capitalism, etc., imperialism, etc., etc., etc. That you cannot, it's not one man who moves history. But it's certainly arguable that if I don't know, if Hitler had been executed after the beer hall putsch, executed for treason, that the subsequent history of Germany would have been much, much different. The subsequent history of the world would have been much, much different. I mean, you could compare him to Stalin in that regard. The Trotskyists, I suppose there's a few of them around even today, although most of them became neoconservatives, that, they talk up, Trotsky. Trotsky was as bloodthirsty or bloodthirstier than Stalin himself. Lenin was looking for any opportunity to kill people. As I mentioned previously, you can see his notes on memos that he got. This problem or that problem, how do we do this? And he writes furiously in the margin, kill them. So I don't know that, Stalin's death in the 1920s would have changed all that much. This movie it's a long movie. It's 2 hours and 22 minutes long. And it is a movie of, after, I don't know, the first 3/4 of an hour, it's unrelieved intensity, an intensity which is too much for some people. It's a movie, if you compare it to, say, Full Metal Jacket, which I've talked about on Theater Thursday. Full Metal Jacket is about a group of men who we get to know. We don't really get to know anyone in this movie. The movie is about the war itself. It's reflected through the eyes of a 14-year-old. And despite that, it is intensely emotionally involving. That the music and the sound editing are superb in that respect. Also, the photography, cinematography by Alexei Rodionov is outstanding. And there are non-professional actors used in this, much as Robert Bresson did in his later films. And there's much to be said for that approach, because actors find it difficult not to be actorly. And of course, with a 14-year-old boy in the lead, his blankness, Fliora's blankness, and the fact that he is, passive receptacle is exceedingly powerful. And I don't know, I think that this would have not gone as well with professional actors. This film was released in 1985, as I mentioned, and very few people had seen it in the West until a couple of years ago when it was restored. And the restoration is an outstanding job. And it is available from the Criterion Collection on Blu-ray with a host of extras, highly recommended, as always, up to their usual high standard. And you can watch it on the Criterion channel, which is a streaming service which features movies in the Criterion Collection and movies that will be coming to the Criterion Collection. And so those are my thoughts on Come and See. Again, I'll warn you that people hear, oh, the movie is intense, etc., etc., and it's become